The Third Punic War began in 149 BCE when Rome, despite the two previous devastating conflicts with Carthage, decided to finally destroy its opponent. This decision was based not only on a long-standing enmity but also on growing concern among the Romans that Carthage, even after its defeat in the previous wars, could again become a threat to Rome. Preparations for the war began in 150 BCE, when Carthage, weakened by the Second Punic War, began to recover, which alarmed Rome. After the end of the Second Punic War in 201 BCE, Carthage was forced to sign a treaty with Rome that limited its military capabilities and placed the city in a subordinate position. Carthage was deprived of the right to wage war without Rome's permission, which weakened its position in the international arena. However, the city gradually began to recover, and despite the restrictions, it continued to develop. In 151 BCE, Carthage, with Rome's consent, was forced to campaign against local tribes in Africa, which became the pretext for Roman intervention. Amid the growing influence of Carthage, the Roman political elite, particularly a group of senators, who supported the idea of destroying Carthage as a potential threat, began to actively lobby for harsh measures. In 150 BCE, the Romans began preparing for war. They took advantage of the dissatisfaction in Africa, where local tribes sought independence, and began active diplomatic and military maneuvers. In 149 BCE, the Roman Senate decreed that Carthage had violated the terms of the peace treaty concluded after the Second Punic War and demanded that the city surrender its weapons and property, as well as withdraw its forces from all African territories. In response to the ultimatum, Carthage offered peace but refused to comply with the conditions that the Romans deemed unacceptable. When negotiations failed to yield results, Rome declared war. The Roman consul, Publius Cornelius Scipio Aemilianus, was appointed as the commander of the forces. Initially, the Romans surrounded the city, establishing a blockade and beginning the siege. Carthage, with significant reserves and fortifications, offered resistance. Despite its weakened state, the city was still capable of putting up a fight, and its inhabitants were determined to resist for the long haul. To defend the city, Carthage assembled an army made up of experienced soldiers and civilians, as well as hired mercenaries. The Carthaginians reinforced their walls by adding additional fortifications. The citizens of Carthage believed they could repel the attack despite the Roman superiority. However, the Romans, led by Scipio Aemilianus, used various siege engines, such as battering rams and catapults, to weaken the city walls. At the beginning of the siege, the Carthaginian forces attempted to wage guerrilla warfare, staging sorties to destroy Roman siege machines and disrupt the blockade. However, the Roman army was better organized and much stronger. During the siege, several serious battles took place, including attempts by the Carthaginians to break the blockade. But the Romans had superiority in supply and technology, which allowed them to gradually wear down the resistance. The Roman army employed a strategy of prolonged siege. Knowing that the city could not hold out for long without necessary resources, the Romans surrounded the city by land and sea, cutting off all trade routes, forcing the Carthaginians to use their food and water supplies. The siege lasted for several years, and despite fierce resistance, Carthage gradually lost strength. Thus, the first event of the Third Punic War, the Siege of Carthage in 149 BCE, marked the beginning of a long and grueling process that would lead to the city's final destruction in 146 BCE. The siege demonstrated Rome's determination to completely destroy its adversary and put an end to Carthage's existence as a political and military force in the Mediterranean.